All right, everybody, I got 1 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get rolling. Hopefully a few more stragglers join. So just want to take a minute to introduce myself. My name is Matthew Odine. I'm the post-regional consultant for Region 7, Riverside, San Bernardino, LA, Inyo, and Mono counties. Co-teaching the class with me today is Alan Soroka. He's Region 6. Give him a second here to introduce himself. And then Christine Ford and Jeff Dunn, also senior law enforcement consultants, are assisting with the class today to field any questions you have, monitor the chats, and so on. And then also gracing our presence is Ralph Brown, Bureau Chief of the Training, Delivery, and Compliance Bureau. So great to have Chief here today. Alan, do you want to say something to start us off?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Alan Soroka, Region 6. That's Santa Clara, San Mateo, Santa Cruz, San Benito, and Monterey counties.
I said all that because I would never remember all those counties. But Jeff, you want to, Jeff or Christine, you want to say anything?
No, just welcome.
Same, welcome.
We'll get rolling. So as all of us know in this state, back on March 4th, 2020, Governor Newsom declared a state of emergency in the state of California. President Trump did the same for the nation on March 13th. With respect to COVID-19, and really it's changed the way that not only in-service training takes place, but academy training, also at the community college level, CSU, UC level, all across the board. Training was pretty much shut down for quite some time, and we're just now starting to rise out of it. So it's created some very unique challenges. Post has taken a lot of effort and steps to work with the agencies and try to help you maintain compliance, but also balancing safety needs. Obviously, we don't want officers to go to a training course and be sitting, 50 in a class that holds 30 and everybody gets COVID and it turns into this super spreader event. And, for a training course that obviously safely should have been put off until a little bit down the line. So depending on where you work in the state, some courses are back up and running. Some are not. It varies radically based on the region and the county that you're in. There's all kinds of different counties have different health regulations that, of course, we all have to adhere to and respect. So we'll get into that a little bit more. So we know that most of you has canceled a lot of the courses, and you're now having some concerns because the current training cycle ends on December 31st, 2020, and you're looking at your compliance reports and you realize, wow, I got a lot of people out of compliance. Some departments are very fortunate. They spent the first year and then the first couple months of 2020 and they got everybody done. That's certainly, looking in hindsight, that's probably the best way to do it. Capitalize on the first year of a training cycle, try to get everybody through, and then use the second year of a training cycle to kind of get those stragglers, those people that were out of injury or maternity leave or deployed through the military or some reason why they missed the training in year one, if you can. So as we know, when the new cycle starts on January 1st, we'll see if that's able to play out.
Now, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Training, Delivery, and Compliance received a lot of questions from the field. A couple of the main questions are, what do we do about Perishable Skills Program and CPT training for the current cycle? And can we convert classrooms, courses into webinars? Now, Commission Regulation 1052 allows post-certified training to be conducted in person or online. And specifically, Regulation 1052 E addresses the requirements for the certification of courses in the webinar format. To answer your first question, what do you do about perishable skills and CPT training? You're going to have to try to do the best job that you can do to meet the perishable skills CPT requirement for this year. Now that means working with your local county health, your city legal, and developing the best plan that will move forward without exposing everybody to excessive risk. And what's that mean? Use some social distancing, use masks, use hygiene and cleanliness products in order to make sure that the environment is safe. as you can possibly make it. There are a lot of unique things that you can do because all you have to do is meet the mandate for the training. And it doesn't say how the training needs to be developed or delivered. It just needs to meet the minimum standards. So if you meet the standard, you can pretty much design your course in a way that will allow you to do that. And we'll talk later on in the presentation about some specific ways to do that. What is post?
Go ahead, Alan. Sorry.
What is post going to do if there's no possible way for post to suspend the law? So what we have to do is we will note that because of the perfect confluence of events that have happened this year, COVID-19, catastrophic wildfires, unprecedented civil unrest, all of those things have impacted some of our agencies. If we get there for your compliance review, and because of that confluence of events, you may have some people that are out of compliance. We can't suspend the requirement for them to be compliant. But what we can do is note in our findings letter that because of these events, it may not have been possible for certain elements of your agency to meet that compliancy.
What we're going to try right now, and I'm really crossing my fingers that this works, is we're going to do breakout rooms. Never done this before. So what I'm going to, real quick, everyone's going to be diverted into a room, hopefully with 5 or 6 other people. And what we just like you to do is just a couple minutes to think about what's a quick, COVID-safe learning activity that you could do specifically to teach arrest and control, firearms, or driver awareness. These are the ones that people are most concerned about, and the questions we get most of the time is obviously with arrest and control, going hands-on, rolling around on a mat, or firearms where you're on a range, close proximity, you're breathing in all this dust and everything else. And driver awareness, of course, you're probably sitting in the car next to an instructor. So we're going to put everybody into groups. If you can think about a response, and we're not going to, obviously, in the limited time we have, when we come back into the main room, what I would like is if you could pick somebody within your group as the spokesperson and go ahead and type your response or your suggestion, if you can, in a few sentences into the chat box would be great. Then we can have that, all those ideas, because we very well might want to steal some of these ideas to pass along to agencies, okay? So I'm going to try to throw everyone into a room right now, and then hopefully you'll be back shortly. Are we losing people now?
We are losing people. They're going into their rooms, it looks like.
I think I got muted on my chat room and I couldn't answer anything, and I think it kicked me out. So I'm not sure if I can be rejoined my chat group. I'm not sure how I can speak once I'm in my chat group.
All right, sorry about that. Let's see if we can fix that.
I think I was in chat group 17 and I could hear them talking. I just had no way of speaking to them.
It doesn't allow me to send him back, Matt.
Sorry, Casey, you're stuck with us here.
No problem.
The groups will come back here in about another minute or so. Just standing by.
Okay. I got kicked out of my group somehow.
Yeah, that's what happens if you're a troublemaker there, Juan. I don't know what to say. This technology is definitely a learning curve. All right, I think I'll bring everybody back, Alan, or give them another minute.
Give him another minute and then we'll bring him back.
I'm really looking forward to seeing what these breakout groups have come up with. It's can be really interesting.
Yeah, there should be some great discussion taking place about what we can do, because it's only limited by your imagination, basically, right?
You are correct. But, I'm just wondering what we're going to be doing for what is it, driver simulator? If we're going to be doing online, or if we can do videos or whatever it is.
Yeah, there's so many options that we can work through. As long as we meet the minimum requirement, we'll be good.
I'm going to try to close the rooms and bring everyone back here.
Okay.
So they got 1 minute left when I hit close. So
And Charisse, you look a lot more comfortable getting rid of that mask. Now that you're safe. No, you definitely don't have to get a computer virus today.
We're supposed to have it on all the time. I have people coming through here, so I was just.
Oh, I see. Okay.
should have everybody back in about 20 seconds.
And if you want me to go through the chat, Matt, I can do that.
Great. I know Christine and Jeff are doing that as well. So
Okay, good.
And then there's that Wahova and Ask Post. I'm not sure on those. I think Christine's got that as well, I believe. Okay, I believe we have everyone back in theory. 213 people. So I know we won't have a chance for everyone to talk. That's obviously one of the downsides with 200 people in a Zoom session, but hopefully you designated your person, and we're really hoping that you came up with a few good nuggets of some suggestions. And we will certainly take all those suggestions and compile them and somehow get that out to the field so that you have the suggestions from this session that you can hopefully maybe implement or consider implementing. Okay. Here. So jumping ahead, there's a series of bulletins that have come out since March, and I just wanted to hit on one. This is a little excerpt from 2020-26, Bulletin 2020-26. Now this deals with specifically the pellet B testing and the entry-level testing. I know not everyone in here does this testing. Some of you do, of course, as training managers. Some of you don't. But the reason why I like it is because even though it's meant for this, it really applies to COVID-19 and training in general. We obviously know the federal and state guidelines on social distancing, this whole 6 feet thing. Yes, I've seen some research that says 6 feet is not enough. 6 feet's too much. It only has to be 5 feet. There's all kinds of interesting theories on how far apart, but 6 feet seems to be what's reasonably socially acceptable. But with the pellet B test, and this may apply to some of your training, is if instead of having a limited number of sessions, maybe consider having more sessions. I know you might be limited sometimes by the number of presentations that you can do per year. Maybe you have a course where you have in EDI, you only have, say, 8 presentations. Maybe you can, if needed, go through your regional consultant and double that or triple that, I suppose, where instead of having 20 people in the room, you have 6 people in the room, assuming you have the resources to do this, where you have a much smaller group of people. That is definitely one of the suggestions that Post in the state of California is recommending. And I think Alan hit on it earlier, just general cleanliness, sanitizing chairs and tables and things like that. This sometimes becomes more important with arrest and control, for example, when you're rolling around on a mat. You know, you have to clean those mats with bleach and water solution. Of course, the safety regulations articulate what is a proper way to clean this type of equipment, hand sanitizers and wipes and all this type of thing. So this might be something you actually need to incorporate into your budget. I know a lot of these things are expensive and they are hard to find because people hoard them and stores kind of are short in supply on some of these things, but this is something you have to take into account if you're not up and running yet, that you want to have this equipment there. Don't assume necessarily everyone's going to show up with a proper mask or everyone's going to show up with gloves. So you'll have to prepare for the people that are not prepared. I mean, as training managers, you understand you're always going to have people show up that are wonderfully prepared and they're ready to go. And then you got people on the other end of the spectrum that they show up to the range and they left their gun at home, right? So you got to have all that in between. And again, with the test, having proctors around, obviously, same with the instructors, seating 6 feet apart and so on. So these are just a lot of the general guidelines that came out of 2026. Alan, did you want to hit on 1010?
And we can talk about 1010. Under the Perishable Skills Program, Consistent with Regulation 1010-8A, the agency should develop a plan to return to compliance once the COVID-19 situation has subsided. Now, depending on who you listen to, that could be mid next year, depending on the vaccine and how interesting this next round of COVID becomes. The records will be analyzed during our regular post-compliance audit. And although each situation of technical non-compliance is going to be judged on its own merits, Post is really sensitive to all the concerns, and we understand the practical problems that this emergency has imposed on all of us. So we take that into consideration to the extent of the non-compliance during the audit process. You guys came up with some really great ideas in the chat that you put in there. We've got a lot of social distancing. We've got a lot for arrest and control that we use mannequins. They run about $3,800 a piece. But everybody hit on the main issues of social distancing, sanitization, use of simulators. All of those type of things will help you be able to meet your perishable skills program during this emergency. So good job.
Thank you, everybody, for doing that. So again, if you're unable to comply, and as you know, there's a little more than 2 months left. So if you haven't done so already, we all recommend that you go into EDI, you run a compliance analysis report on your agency. And of course, you can do it for all of your sworn officers, all of your reserves officers, and your dispatchers. So you run a report on all three, and then basically try your best, as Alan said, to get everybody through. If you don't, we are likely going to have, when we do our annual audits throughout next year, as you guys know, when we come to the agency and we review all the background files, we look to make sure all the required documents are there. We also look at the training files, and we look at these compliance reports. If you're out of compliance, you're out of compliance. Obviously, make sure that you have documentation of your efforts. And this is to protect yourself and your liability. Certainly get advice from your own legal counsel of what the potential ramifications could be. You know, obviously COVID is a valid excuse, but, you know, for example, if you have an officer that didn't, say, qualify with their firearm, and it just so happens that that's an officer that gets involved in an officer-involved shooting, as you guys know, there's going to be PRAs generated. They're going to go after the training records that you have internally. They're likely going to request any records from Post. So anybody that's out of compliance, yes, could it be a problem for your agency? Yes, it could, because that's going to be used in a court of law and whatnot. So obviously structure it the best you can. We, again, as law enforcement consultants, we cannot give someone a pass or a green light to this. But and then we're going to have some little caveat in the letter. So when we're done with these audits, obviously we write a letter to the sheriff or your chief of police, and we let them know how the agency's doing and maybe some recommendations on how they can improve. And then all that goes in there. So again, we encourage full compliance. I understand there's only a couple months left. Many of my departments down in my region, I've got 48 agencies. I know there's well over 600 agencies. A lot of them are at 100%. Great for them. That's you know, gold star. But I've also got a handful that have probably no chance of getting there, and you know, they need to start thinking ahead for the next cycle, because we can't go back in time and get everybody in compliance. But perishable skills is obviously very significant, as is CPT, just the general continual professional training overall. So one of the ways to get around all this COVID training on site and a lot of the concerns that you guys have is we get a lot of calls that, can I take an existing class that I have now? And this is more typically with a classroom class. You're teaching a 2-day supervisor school where it's generally just in a classroom, teacher instruction, maybe 4 or 5 instructors come in and they're just in a classroom environment. Can I take that onto an online platform, right? So can we do webinars like what we're doing now? This symposium was originally going to be on site, probably at a nice hotel somewhere where we get all the networking. Obviously that didn't work out because of COVID, and it was brought online. One thing that's interesting is like with this particular class we're in right now, the COVID course that we're teaching, it doesn't have CPT credit. Just the way this symposium was set up, there's no CPT credit. So the tracking the participation is not as big a deal. Right? We're not actually getting credit for this. If we were all getting CPT credit for this, it becomes a little bit more important because you now, as the presenter, have to confirm that everyone is there. You know, just a side note: I teach at the community college online, and I got a bunch of kids that I know they log in, and it's in Zoom, and they don't have their camera on, and their mic's muted, and I ask questions throughout a 3-hour lecture, and crickets, right? Nobody says anything. As far as I know, they're not even there. There's zero participation. So I do some polls and things like that. I make them type their name in the beginning. I make them type their name at the end. And if they don't type their name in at the beginning and the end, then that just tells me they weren't there. So they don't get credit for attending the class. I show them as absent, right? And they need to demonstrate. So that's something you need to think about when you take a course online as a webinar. Is one of the big things is, are the people participating? Are they present? So something as simple as having the camera turned on, where you have to have your camera on. So we know that there's somebody sitting there. Now, sometimes you don't know even what the students look like, but you know that there's a human being there. And maybe some kind of assignments pre, post, or during that they have to do to ensure participation. But we will certify courses that you already have as a webinar, assuming you reach out to your consultant, you express that's what you want to do. And it does require some effort on your part to modify the outlines, because you're likely not going to be able to take the same expanded course outline and replicate it, because all of the things where you're saying we're going to break up into groups, we're going to do this, you have to articulate how you're going to do it, like what we just did now online, because you can't just do it in a classroom where you say, hey, Alan and Sharice and Casey, you're group 1, and Juan and Matt and Sylvia, you're group 2. We can't do that. So per regulation 1055D, so if you want to modify one of your existing courses in EDI, reach out to your consultant. 30 days in advance is ideal. Sometimes you might not be able to do that, but 30 days. And then you're going to request for your course to be converted into a webinar. And this is all under regulation 1052. I don't know, Alan, I know you're pretty savvy on 1052. You want to talk about the elements of this?
1052 is fairly straightforward. If you pull it up on the post website under publications, post regulations, and find 1052, you can go through it step by step, and it literally walks you through it. Or contact your regional consultant, because we can send you out a template that Melanie Dunn, one of our staff professional members, helped to draft so that you can follow it along. But it provides the framework for your instructor-led training based on a webinar format. And it describes the webinar as synchronously facilitated training that's delivered via the internet. It's considered an instructor-led course just for the purpose of certification through EDI. This does not allow you to use a taped webinar, because that won't be certified for any CPT credit, since there's no ability to verify any attendance or even any trainee interaction with the instruction, because you can't interact very well with a tape.
And that's not to be confused with the post-learning portal. You know, one very good option right now to make up the hours. So I'm sure a bunch of you have maybe officers here and there that, you know, they've got 22 of their 24 hours of CPT for the cycle done. They just need 2 hours. Those are the perfect people. Hey, go into the learning portal, pick a topic. There's hundreds of topics in there. And then upon completion, after going through the post-developed course, you know, it requires them to actively engage and click on things and answer questions. The post credit will be reflected on their post profile without you having to do anything. Now, the multimedia courses are the ones that are a little bit different. The ones that used to be the old DVDs. So probably a lot of you guys have in your departments those DVD collections. You know, you don't have to throw those away. Those are still useful. If you wanted to break out one of those DVDs and facilitate a course in-house for 5, 10 people, assuming all the other requirements are met. Then you go into your EDI, and every department has the multimedia option. And then you would go in and create the roster, assuming you facilitated it. You're satisfied that they learned what they needed to learn, and then you create a roster. So that's another way to get hours if you have people that are lacking. So I just wanted to throw that in because I don't think I was going to talk about it anywhere else. But so thanks. So Alan hit on it right on. The 1052. So we get the new course. Sorry, and now you talk to your consultant. We're on the same page. It sounds like a great idea. You're going to go into EDI and you put the course into modification. And the biggest thing you're going to modify is obviously the expanded course outline. You're going to, and we're going to talk about that in a second of what you need to include. Because you're going to be removing things like anything that's classroom-based terminology, psychomotor skills. You can't say the officers are going to pair up and they're going to go hands-on. If you left that in your outline for an online class, obviously you're not doing that. So we want to make sure that the outlines are 100% accurate of what's being taught. Okay. So now you might want to create a webinar, but you also don't want to eliminate your face-to-face because we know eventually COVID will be gone and you'll go back to the face-to-face. So you'll go into your EDI on your course administration page, and you will click on the variable format button that most people don't know what that means. That variable format allows you to leave your 8-hour class in the classroom in there unscathed, and then you add in the 8-hour version of your outline for your webinar. So you have both outlines in there. And that's, if you don't click variable format, it will not allow you to enter multiple outlines. It will only, so if you don't click that and you enter in your new outline, it will overwrite your classroom. So then when you go back to a classroom, you're like, where's my classroom? Well, you got rid of it. So you'd have to go back in and re-upload it again versus having the variable format. One thing that came up recently that has been fixed by our EDI team is for every class that you present, you have to select a location, a physical location. So in most of your courses, there might only be one location because you do the course at the same place all the time. Some of you move your course around and you click on the location and you got 20 locations on there. So it varies, but you had no option of webinar for doing an internet. So now you do. So now if it's going to be, if it's taught online or a class like what we're doing now, then in the location, you want to make sure that you select internet webinar, and that will then select that as an option. So now when you have your drop down of locations, as of, I believe, a couple months ago, you can now select this. So this is very important when you have a variable format to update the location for the specific course that you're teaching. And Alan, just interrupt me anytime if I'm missing something. So this was very important because it also comes into training reimbursement and whatnot. The location of where the course is taught is obviously very important. So when you modify the course, got the correct location, now you're going to be submitting your new expanded course outline. You're going to make sure that the learning activities in particular and the methods of assessing the learning can and are being done online versus in a classroom. Okay, so if you say at the end of the classroom class, I'm going to pass out a quiz and everybody's going to take a 10-question quiz. Okay, well, you're not doing that online, so you might want to have an online quiz, or if it's something you're going to have, you don't care if they have it while they're doing it, you'll send them the handout in advance. Maybe they'll fill out the handout or take the quiz as you're going through your presentation. And then at the end, they're required to scan it or email it back to you for credit, right? There's lots of ways you could do this. It's, one of the popular ones. So you still want to have your learning activities whenever possible. I understand there's limitations. I'm actually really excited. We just did the breakout room, and best I can tell, everybody actually made it back. So I learned something new every day. So that's something I will do. And of course, polls seem very popular. Handouts, things like that. Quizzes, where you can build a quiz, are also popular. So this is a little checklist. If you have not received this, I think this went out a few months back of just kind of a cheat sheet of how to implement the regulations in 1052. If you don't have this, we can certainly post this with all of the course documents.
Yeah, and I would specifically recommend you pull up Bulletin 2020-37 because it describes the webinar and offers you assistance in how you can convert your classroom course directly to a webinar.
Maybe we could share that link, I don't know, in the chat to that bulletin, or that would be great.
It's in the chat already.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So again, things to take into account. We take for granted. I'm here in Southern California. I have Cox cable. For the most part, my internet usually works pretty good. Sometimes if they're doing it on their phone or you're in a bad area, the student might not have the internet capabilities to join the course, and they keep getting kicked out, or their computer's just inadequate. It's 20-year-old laptop. It's not going to cut it. They don't have a Zoom account. They don't have a Google Classroom account. They don't have a Teams account. That's why it's very important to pick what learning platform you're going to use. I know we all use different stuff. We use at Post, we use Teams for our meetings. We've been using Zoom quite a bit for training. I know some departments use Google Classroom or Canvas, like community colleges. So you got to make sure that you have access and you understand how to actually build out the content depending on the learning system you're using. Obviously the technology, how you're going to monitor the trainees' attention, right? Even with a class like this, where Alan and I are talking, it's a tremendous help. I mean, it would be without Christine and Jeff to be monitoring kind of all the chats and things like that. It's difficult to do that by yourself. So if you were a solo instructor teaching a class, I would seriously think about keeping that class size to 20 people, or max 30 people would probably still be incredibly difficult, but not like where we are right now with 236 people. There's no way one person can do that. So you're usually going to have a primary instructor and a secondary, or 2 or 3 depending on the size of the group, so that you can adequately address monitoring the people are actually there, monitoring the chat. It looks like somebody's kind of missing in action. If you do a poll, maybe they can send an email, hey Alan, I see you missed the last 2 polls, how you doing, buddy, right? Because he walked away from his computer to go make a sandwich or something, right? So you definitely got to think about these things when you're when you're thinking about how you're going to set this up, because if you don't adequately describe how you're going to ensure active participation, then the course is not going to be certified. Right? So these are all things you need to take into account. So as you guys know, a while back, Post created this kind of course in a box, this AB 392 course, which is very well received. A lot of your agencies have presented this many times as an on-ground in the classroom course. So after COVID hit, this was one of the ones where we got a lot of requests to turn it into a webinar. So this is the outline that you all have, especially if you teach this. And then the comments in green are for the webinar. So they're things that you would take the original expanded course outline that most of you just plugged in with 0 changes because it was built for you. But now it's a webinar, so you have to make these type of changes. So like for the first part on 1052E, the statement, the webinar format for this course will be held in a live interactive format using, blank, using Zoom, using Teams, using Canvas, and then articulating it. And then, for example, one of the things that you really need to make sure is the person that registered the same person that's in the classroom, right? So this is where they have to pre-register. You authenticate who they are depending on what you're talking about. You might be talking about something very sensitive, something with officer safety issues where you don't want somebody that's unauthorized to attend your class. You don't want a member of, I don't know, the media or some anti-law enforcement group to crash your class. So you need to authenticate who they are, and you need to articulate how you're going to do that. They maybe have a specific username and password to log in, these type of things. So you got to think security, you got to think participation, and so on. So this is kind of the front of the outline. But again, identifying the learning platform, its capabilities, its limitations. What is exactly the student going to need to do to log in? How do they need a password? Do they need to be invited in? Do they get a special link? These type of things, right? And again, monitoring the chat box. So the purpose of the course, this is something relatively new. You know, when we go through, if you go through your outlines that you submitted to EDI likely even a couple years ago, and you look at the outline that's in there, chances are good that it doesn't contain the purpose of the course at the top of the outline. That's a relatively new requirement. So as we go into 2021, when requirements change for changing courses and updating courses, you know, every other year, every course you have in EDI will automatically go into modification based on the course number and things like that. But it'll go into modification, and then one of the things you're going to need to do is make sure every expanded course outline has the course purpose. And if it's a classroom class or an online class, it's likely going to be the same purpose, but you might have to articulate a little bit more if you're getting into different dynamics of how the class is actually instructed. So every expanded course outline must have a course purpose statement. In this case, the AB 392 class, it'd say something, in this case it does. The purpose of this course is to provide peace officers. Sorry, just lost my screen here.
Matt, we had a really good question come up, and I think the room would probably benefit from it. It's what platform should they use? Should they use Team versus Zoom, et cetera, et cetera? And one thing we need to let people know is POST doesn't advocate for or recommend or endorse one over the other. It's just whichever one meets the need and meets the security that you require for the course. You can choose whatever platform you find useful at that point.
And of course, you might be limited. I mean, in some cases, your department has a Zoom account, and that's all that they have, and that's all they're going to pay for. Then,
Exactly.
Of course, you might be stuck with that. We're lucky at Post; we've got several options. If you don't have the option, then that's obviously something you need to go to your command and make the argument that that's a good purchase and it would be worthwhile and whatnot. But the course purpose, you know, this is required, and of course, most of you have some kind of a course purpose now. When you go to the catalog and you see the little blurb, you know, 4 or 5 sentences of what the class is about. For the most part, that is your course purpose, give or take. So you would just be taking that, cutting that, pasting it, putting it into your outline, making sure it's appropriate, and then you have that. And of course, we know that AB 392 came into effect in January 1 of 2020, so the course has been growing ever since then. Again, the webinar has to be live, interactive, cannot be pre-recorded. You must, typically students will be required to pre-register for the course. Class size, again, we don't necessarily always say a limitation, but 15 students is pretty popular with online things, especially if there's only one instructor. For the most part, your average run-of-the-mill in-class classroom seems to go up to about 30. Obviously, if you're teaching perishable skills, you know, you're doing an arrest and control class, for example, there's no way in hell you're going to have one instructor with 30 students on the mat, right? I could just imagine at my old agency, within 5 minutes, they would be a lot of injuries because they would be slamming each other and just getting crazy with it. And you can't have that, right? So, and a tactical shoot or something, I mean, literally, or a pit maneuver class or a high-speed driving course, you know, it might be 1-to-1. It's one student and one instructor. So you have to take that into account, the actual ratios of what is safe, what will ensure active participation, and what will make sure that you can articulate that everyone was present. So there is no right or wrong answer when they say, well, what's the absolute limit? I don't know. I mean, I've had some classroom courses where there's a couple instructors and they say, we want to have 45, 50 people in the class, and the room can accommodate, 100. So there's lots of space in there just for them to space out. Fine. So it's something you have to reach out to your consultants, because if the course is set at 30, then that's what we expect you to do. If you go over that, then you get put on an over enrollment report, and then we kind of send that to you, and it kind of makes you look bad. It's like maybe poor planning or something. And so if you know you're going to exceed the limit for a particular class, reach out in advance so that we can go in, modify it, change the number to avoid those over enrollment reports getting completed. And then if we get sent from staff, hey, contact so-and-so presenter or this police department because they went over. So we can certainly avoid that with prior notice whenever possible. You're going to send the students a link just like you did today. Presumably you all got a link. You all got a password, right? So the password is how we're making sure people that don't belong are not here. You have access to your own computer with a video, with audio capabilities. We require that or recommend that the camera be activated at all times. Some of you don't have a camera on, so like right now, I have no idea if you're sitting at your computer. You probably are, you might not be. Obviously, sometimes you don't want the people to have a camera on, I suppose, if they're getting dressed or they're not an appropriate backdrop, I don't know, but with a lot of classes, you want them to have the camera on so you can see that they're there. Again, as the presenter, you can mute their microphones. You have some capabilities to control the class. So I've learned a lot just by preparing for this, as far as breakout rooms and things like that. And so during the presentation, again, the additional instructor, I think I beat that down. If you set it up where they have to go into a waiting room, then that gives another step for you, because you have to look at the waiting room and furtively check on their name, or they can't get in. Or you can make them just put the link and the password and they're in. That's a security feature that you can do. We don't necessarily have an opinion one way or another. If it's 10 people in the class, or if you know who everybody is, it's a reoccurring thing, then maybe just let them in. If it's a course with people you don't know, or maybe people from outside agencies where you know their name, but you just want to make sure the email matches the name, then certainly maybe have them go into a waiting room is a good option. And then they have to sit there until you let them in.
We do have a lot of people responding that they're here though, Matt.
They're here. No, I mean, but just as an example, like you can't necessarily always physically see them. And of course we know that people are here, but this class is abnormal. For the most part, most of us are not going to teach a class with 235 people. So there's just extra hoops you got to jump through as you increase the number of your class size. It's just something to think about. Obviously, the smaller the meeting, the more manageable, the more easy it is to operate. I know, Alan, you probably are familiar with a lot of these bulletins. So dating back to March, Post has put out several bulletins, very specific bulletins, dealing with COVID-19. All of these bulletins are on the Post website, post.ca.gov, and then go to the bulletins. So you can download all these. Hopefully, everyone in here gets the regional newsletters for your region. If you don't, then please go to the Post website and register. Every month, all of the consultants send out a newsletter to our entire regions, and they always contain the newest bulletins that are obviously very important. Some of them are more applicable to your job than others, but the link is in there to every bulletin. And the last several newsletters have contained all of the COVID bulletins. We have not removed them. They've all stayed in there. So you have kind of a COVID reference resource type center to kind of revisit these. Alan, is there any of these that you wanted to hit on specifically?
No, we've had some questions regarding the chemical agent suspension. That only applies to the basic course. That does not apply to agency training. So if your agency decides that it is okay to continue chemical agents training during COVID. That's entirely up to the agency. That's not a post decision, but the suspension relates specifically to the Basic Course Academy, and that is under Bulletin 2020-25.
These bulletins are very useful. I know not everybody does the academy. I know we're at the conclusion, but Alan, I can't see the suggestions or the recommendations back from the learning activity. Is there a way we could maybe share a few of those just for a few minutes? I'm just curious what they came up with, because I know in my region I get questions all the time, almost exclusively on arrest and control.
Yes.
Firearms seems to be a little more reasonable because you're typically, most of the ranges are outdoors and you can separate the shooters. Might take a little longer, but they can get it done. The driving has been, some of them have been completely suspended it, or the instructor will stand outside of the car for like a slow speed driver awareness versus being in the car, that type of thing. So any
That's
good
one of the
suggestions?
things that came up during the chat was that for EVOC, have slow speed and have the instructor outside of the vehicle. For arrest and control, we had several who suggested using mannequins, some social distancing, masks, and decreasing the activity to decrease the huffing and puffing. So still be able to demonstrate exactly what the learning outcome would be for arrest and control while giving some social distancing and using a mannequin as opposed to another person. Using webinars, that seems to be a real big hit. And let's see, scrolling down here. Most of it's social distancing and using masks and sanitizer to clean before and after, limiting classroom size, that type of thing. So a lot of good thought went into it. It seems like everybody's on the same page in terms of the social distancing and the sanitization, temperature checks. I know we got one from Lindsay for social distancing, temperature checks before trainees are allowed into the room to train with others, masks at all times, hand washing and sanitizer whenever possible, and less officers per training event to lower the number of potential exposures.
That's a great point. I know just in the last few weeks, I went to Barstow Police and Hemet Police, and both of them, before I could enter the building, checked my temperature. So I thought that was great. You might make them sign a contact tracing waivers, kind of a big thing. I know I went out to dinner the other night and they asked for my name and telephone number in case there was a COVID outbreak. It would help with kind of contact tracing type things. So these are things that you can think about for your course. You know, if you have an outbreak at your department, you might want to be able to articulate when the chief asks you, did this outbreak come from the training course you did last week? You know, the only way you're going to know that is if you know who was in the class and you can backtrack and kind of take into account all of the regular county-wide health concerns and recommendations and consider throwing all of that into your courses as well. So Alan, we'll share that. We'll definitely go through that chat and extract the good nuggets and make sure everybody gets that. Again, please read all the bulletins. But at the end of the day, I know a lot of people want to do webinars. So look through your existing courses that you already present. I mean, most of you have one, or some of you have dozens of courses. So if you look through and you say, hey, this one might be a good candidate for a webinar, this is something we probably want to take online moving forward, reach out to your consultant, obviously make the changes to the expanded course outline that need to be made, make sure all the elements of 1052 are met, make sure you got the technology and the learning platform and the adequate number of instructors, or articulating how you're going to do, even face-to-face, if you're doing arrest and control and both people are standing there and they're 6 feet apart and they're wearing a mask and they got gloves on, and you demonstrate and they do the hands-on part on a mannequin that's wiped down properly, that would probably suffice. It's mainly what you consider to be appropriate and that you're satisfied that they learned what they need to learn. everything that was in the outline was covered adequately, and that they have the information they need to go out in the field and be safe and do their job effectively, then you go into EDI and give them credit. And of course, you got a couple more months, do the best you can to get to 100%. You know, that's where we shoot for. If you can't, you can't. Just be prepared to articulate, document, you know, why you couldn't get there, what, you know, the circumstances that came into play. Obviously, COVID-19. We understand that too, so we're not out to slam anybody or get anybody in trouble. That's just the reality of things. You know, everything's been since the middle of March. It was an abrupt stop, and it's just now in some cases getting back up and running. So
now, Matt, one of the things that some of the agencies have been doing is, since we now allow a bifurcated perishable skills course where you can do modular, let's say, arrest and control. You do the cognitive portion in module 1, which is 2 hours of case law department policy using case studies. And you can actually get 2 hours of the cognitive section done. Even if you cannot possibly do the physical, you will at least show a good faith effort to meet the cognitive portions of some of the perishable skills that can help limit your liability exposure significantly.
now, Alan, most departments have their PSP in there as 1 4-hour block. What do they need to do to get the bifurcated?
All they need to do is go in and make it a variable format. And the variable format will be 2 hours for the cognitive, 2 hours for the physical skills. And then submit that modification to the regional consultant. And then after we review it, we can get that approved.
Christine Ford, do you have anything, any suggestions or comments that you think we missed?
There's a couple questions in the chat box that if you guys could answer. Is Post considering allowing any online courses for the Academy? I believe Jeff Dunn just answered that on the chat. And then will this recording be available to us at a later time?
I will check with Elaine, but I know they are recorded. And do you happen to know the answer to that? I know they.
Yeah, some of the documents that your instructors will be able to provide, including the PowerPoints and/or documents and the recorded sessions, those that have agreed to allow that to be put on our website will do that at the conclusion of the symposium.
I know that this presentation is available. You can all look at this, note nothing. And then I'm going to add in the 1052 worksheet that's not in there right now, but as we complete, I'll make sure that's in there as well. But basically, all the consultants are here for you. This is why we exist. So if you want to create a webinar, easiest first step is just pick up the phone and call your consultant, and we'll get you on the right step as far as all that goes. Yeah, the Basic Training Bureau does all the academy. I know that I have a couple academies in my region that came up where you guys teach in-service and you also teach the academy. And I know they went through meticulous review of all the learning domains to see which parts could be potentially done online, and I believe many of them can be, but that's something that we would defer you to the Basic Training Bureau if you're an academy director or academy coordinator. That's outside of our bureau, so if you have that specific question, certainly we can help you, but we'll direct you to Basic Training because that's their forte. So, any other questions, Christine, that are worth?
Nope, I think we're good.
Jeff, you got anything? Jeff Dunn?
Not really. There were a couple comments in the chat from South Bay that does offer some of the bifurcated courses, the kind of hybrid courses that are part online, part in person. So there are some options out there. And that's all.
That's a great idea. If you can take care of the 2 hours in a little bit bigger setting, a little safer setting, and get rid of all the policy and legal and all that stuff, and then limit, you know, instead of the people being in the mat room on the mat for 4 hours, they're on the mat for 2 hours. I mean, that's all good. It's 2 hours less exposure to potentially getting COVID. So these are all great suggestions. that if we take them all into account and we implement as much of this stuff as possible, we'll keep our people as safe as possible, and hopefully they don't catch this virus. And we've seen what it does to departments that get a big group of people infected, where they're now quarantined. It has massive implications for staffing and deployment. I mean, sadly, we've had officers that have lost their lives. I mean, tragic, right, because of this virus. So we want to do everything we can do to limit that and keep our people safe, and still accomplish the mission of making sure everybody's trained properly, so when they do go out in the field, that they're safe and they're doing things correctly. So I see a hand raised. Lindsay, are you able to turn on your mic?
Hey, it's me. I had my hand raised, but I just wanted to bring up with the DVDs that you brought up, which is a great advice to use those. Before you dig something out of a desk and plug it in and watch it, make sure it's still valid. We've decertified many, many DVDs, either because they were dated or the officer's safety tactics weren't up to snuff. So before you even think about using a DVD, please check either in the roster in EDI or on the Post website. The Post website will have all the live DVDs that are still active. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you for bringing that.
Great input. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, if you go into EDI, you click on the multimedia course and you scroll. There's, I want to say, a couple hundred of them in there. Great topics, and then they each have a 3-digit number. You click on it, and then you get the course materials, and those courses, of course, have to be facilitated. So most of them are 2 hours long. So you just pick a room where you can do it safely and run them through the material. Have the Q&A session afterwards, and then you go in and enter the roster. So it's a great way to get the hours that maybe they're not getting because of so many classes that have been closed down over the last 6 months. Anything else? Ralph Brown, are you still there? You want anything, chief advice or anything for the group?
No, not really. Just, keep up the good work, you guys. All you guys are training managers out there. We know it's a tough time. We're doing the best we can to be flexible with you to help you achieve your goal of getting your folks all CPT PSP compliant. So thanks for what you do, and keep your head up, and we're doing the same, and we'll help each other out, and we'll get through all this. So thanks.
All right, so thank you, all the Post consultants. Again, just the way this seminar was set up, our symposium was set up, unfortunately, this block doesn't get CPT credit, but we certainly want your input. I mean, was this information helpful in some way? Hopefully it was. We'll make sure that all of the materials are provided to you. Certainly, I would recommend you go through the bulletins and familiarize yourself with all the ones that, in particular, the ones that are applicable to you. You can look at the PowerPoint again at your leisure. I believe, Alan, I think you had a handout. Is that right? We'll make sure we put in there along with the 1052 checklist. And then again, if you want to make a class a webinar, please just reach out to your consultant. I know I've done it dozens of times already, as have my counterparts. So that's why we're here. So thank you, everybody, for attending. We appreciate it. I can stick around, or I don't know if we'll stick around for any other questions, but that's pretty much the information we wanted to put out today. So have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the symposium. You got a lot of good speakers and a lot of good classes coming up over the next couple days. So looking forward to seeing you guys there, and really appreciate all that you do for the law enforcement profession. So thank you very much.
Stay safe, everyone.